Today, the Commissioner of the Environment just confirmed that the Liberal plan isn't working. In fact, Canada comes in last in the G7. Will the minister finally do his job, or should he go back to climbing the CN Tower?
Oh! Today we are starting our new question period series where we are recording it live as it happens and then dropping the video as soon as it's edited. So we actually don't really know what's going to happen, but without further ado,
let's take a look.
After 9 years of brutal assaults on Canadian energy workers, the Prime Minister just delivered a knockout punch with a production cap on oil and gas development here, which his own department admits will kill jobs and drive investment south of the border. Canadian energy company Enbridge just announced a $700 million project in the U.S. The Prime Minister is creating powerful paychecks for American workers while Canadian workers can't afford their mortgages or food. It's completely baffling why he would kill jobs here just to see them created down south. Is he getting some kind of a commission from the U.S. energy lobby for all the business he's sending them?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, what the member opposite is saying is simply not true. It's a cap on pollution, Mr. Speaker. In fact, production is going to go up 16% by 2030, and companies in Alberta, in the oil sands sectors, are making billion-dollar investment to make sure that workers in Alberta have a future and the energy sector has a future, and we can fight climate change at the same time, Mr. Speaker.
those statements seem at odds with each other. I mean, if the Liberals were trying to stop carbon pollution, they would be trying as hard as possible to get us onto nuclear power.
Or get other countries onto coal or off of coal.
Yeah.
Like, come on. How, it's just this is the most frustrating thing. Does oil and gas pollute? Sure. But you can't just wave a magic wand and say, okay, so we are having to reduce our pollution by 35% in, by the way, just 6 years, because this will only come into being in 2026. So you want to completely transform the oil and gas sector within Canada in 6 years. This is completely irresponsible. And yeah, it's going to kill jobs. It is going to absolutely kill jobs. No wonder Alberta and the Western energy sector is pissed.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
It's a cap on production, and his own department says it will kill jobs. And let's listen to something else that their own officials are saying. The Prime Minister's own Environment Commissioner has blasted the carbon tax as a failure. Here's some of his conclusions. Quote, the government has not made sufficient progress to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And quote, Canada remains the worst performer among all member countries of the G7. Every time the Prime Minister makes the carbon tax go up, Canada's climate performance goes down. Yep. Yet he keeps doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. So why won't he call a carbon tax election so Conservatives can stop his insanity?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada is talking about climate change. We should note this somewhere in a book because it doesn't happen very often. If only they would talk about the fact that for 10 years they did nothing, which is why we had to pick up the slack from what when we came into power, emissions were going to overshoot 2030 by more than 30%, Mr. Speaker. Emissions are down by 8% because of our plan, the lowest emissions in 25 years, no thanks to the Conservative Party.
That's not true, is it?
No, he's cherry picking. Like we are, I think it was ranked 65th or 67th in terms of, developed countries when it comes to our environmental position. And he's even, like he, as in Jubbo, has admitted in committee that they don't even know how much the carbon tax is helping bring down pollution. And gee, why would that be? Because it's impossible. That is impossible. You are not collecting any data on that. That's literally impossible to be able to say with any scientific certainty whatsoever that the carbon tax is reducing emissions by X percent. Like there's no data being collected on how much gas is somebody is somebody using, how much heating oil is somebody using. Are you even using heating oil? Are you not? Like,
well, and I suppose the other question would be how much of it is due to the carbon tax? I'm going to say zero. But how much is due to the carbon tax, and how much is it due to like advances in technology?
And how much is due to the fact that people can't afford anything anymore?
Just encourage all members, please, to not take the floor unless they're recognized by the speaker. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Pick up the slack. Under their policies, Canada keeps falling on performance indexes. The only thing this carbon tax is doing is making Canadians poorer, and the results are devastating. A damning new report from the Salvation Army shows the human suffering this Prime Minister is inflicting on Canadians. Let's look at the report. First-time users of food banks shot up this year from 43% to 58%, and 1 in 4 parents are eating less so their children can eat. This is in Canada. How can he be so cold-hearted? Why won't he at least let Canadians decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Economic Development in Quebec.
Monsieur le Président, savez-vous qui...
Mr. Speaker, do you know who has an inferiority complex in this place? It's the Conservative Party. Because
what?
Canada has the lowest inflation. Interest rates are going down. Not only are we helping Canadians in need, we're building housing, we've got the family benefits, and the only ones in this place with an inferiority complex about Canada's economic resiliency is the Conservative Party. The honourable member.
So Franco was describing to us, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting this, but the reason that the inflation rates appear so low now is because the year before that they were so high. So just for numbers' sake, if between 2022 and 2023 you have what's the right word? Inflation rate. Sorry, I think I said interest rate. I mean inflation rate. So if you have an inflation rate of 8% from 2022 to 2023, and now from 2023 to 2024, you have an inflation rate of let's make it simple, 1%. It's 1% of that 8%. It's not like a baseline 1%. Is that correct, my understanding?
Well, kind of. So, the previous year at 8%, prices were going up at 8% per month, right? It's not that they're just 8% more expensive. They are going up at 8% per month. So even though inflation has come back down, we haven't lost that 8% price increase that happened in the previous year. So, things are still really expensive. That's the thing. So the inflation rate now at say 1 or 2%, it's on the new price of everything being that much more expensive. So the point is a 2% inflation rate now versus a 2% inflation rate before COVID is completely different.
Yeah, that's the argument I was trying to get at. So even though I'm going to say interest rate again, the inflation rate is going up more slowly, it's still it's still bad.
Like, put it this way. Let's say something cost $100 before COVID, and inflation was, at 1%, right? So 1% of $100 is $1. After COVID, let's say it's $200. Inflation rate at 1% is now $2, not $1. So actually it's going up twice as much. So the 1% after COVID versus the 1% pre-COVID is the equivalent to 2% pre-COVID, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Member for Mégantic Éclairable. The Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, we learned today that our greenhouse gas emissions records are not reliable. And this Prime Minister contributed to doubling the price of food and rent while at the same time not succeeding in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They've not met any of their targets. When will the Prime Minister call an election so that we can cut taxes? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Mr. Speaker, you're going to have to put this on your calendar. The Conservatives have raised the question of climate change. They did nothing while they were in office. Nothing for energy efficiency, nothing for electrification of transit. The Conservatives did nothing. Their record was not good. Canada has had the best plan in recent years for reducing emissions, and it's certainly no thanks to the Conservative Party. They have no plan for the environment, no plan to protect Canadians, and no plan for national security. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. I think the Minister should read the Commissioner of the Environment's report. It's clear. Reductions are not attributable to any steps taken by the government. The Liberal environment policy is not a policy. It's just a plan for the environment. It's just a plan to tax. The Liberals, Canada under the Liberals has the worst record for emissions reductions. When will the government stop punishing Canadians so that we can finally cut taxes after an election? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. It's incredible what the Conservatives are willing to say. They've got their heads in the sand. Insurable costs for Canadians for the impact of climate change were $7 billion in June and August. It's unprecedented. And what would the Conservatives do? Just let the planet burn.
Oh, really?
You know, I think the left uses climate change as like the boogeyman, the catch-all for anything bad that happens. I mean, they're blaming the Jasper fire on climate change, and there's evidence to suggest that negligence played a huge part.
Well, there's lots of evidence to suggest the fact that they could have actually mitigated or prevented the entire Jasper disaster in the first place. But this is what Gibault is hanging his hat on when he's talking about these insurable costs.
Right.
Because half the town was gone.
Right.
Like, it's disgusting. It's his own department. They were sent emails. And then someone said, okay, so you're telling me that we should not take all these preventative measures around Jasper? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, because it looked bad in the media for them to do prescribed burns.
Right.
Which, I mean, is part of the forest cycle. It's going to burn. So either it burns when lightning hits it, or it burns when you do it in a controlled manner.
Yeah. You either burn it and no buildings burn, or you don't, and half the town burns down. Well, I guess we saw what choice that he took. So I would say that all of that insurable cost isn't due to climate change. It's due to a pathetic Liberal government.
They have no plan to fight climate change, no plan to create jobs in the 21st century economy, no plan to protect Canadians, their drinking water and their health. It's a true disgrace. Before I turn the floor over to the Honourable Member for La Prairie, I'd just like to remind members not to talk while the Speaker has the floor. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, what farmers feared has happened in the Senate. Senator Peter Harder tabled an amendment to C-282 that prevents the bill from protecting supply management. Harder's amendment renders the bill inoperative for all renegotiations of existing trade deals. In other words, the Senate is doing Donald Trump a favor. He wants to attack supply management as soon as 2026 by renegotiating CUSMA. Peter Harder and Peter Boehm don't work for our agriculture. They work for Trump. Will the leader ask senators to defeat the amendment? The Honourable Government House Leader in the House. Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We agree with the bloc. Bill C-282 on protecting supply management is important, and I'm disappointed with the Senatorial Committee who voted against the bill and who moved that amendment. And I would call on senators to respect the will of the House, and I would call on all senators to vote against the amendments and to support our farmers who are there to feed Canadians and who contribute a lot to our economy. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Isn't Harder one of their guys?
Yeah.
All right, just making sure I understood that.
But this is what happens when you prioritize trying to put fanatics in the Senate. Sometimes you lose control of them.
Right.
And I was also going to say it didn't take long to start blaming Trump for things. It's been, 2 days? Trump doesn't take office till next year, guys. So, anyhow, whatever floats your boat.
The honourable member for La Prairie. Senators Harder and Beam confirmed that from the outset, all they wanted to do was kill C-282. Their amendment virtually guarantees that supply management will be sacrificed again in the CUSMA renegotiation with Trump. They're attacking the all-party vote of this place. They're attacking 6,000 companies and 100,000 jobs in Quebec. They want to weaken our regions, ruin our producers, and weaken our agricultural model. I call on the leader, but this applies to all parties. Will the Senate leader ask senators to vote against this sabotage? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, indeed, we are calling on senators to support the bill in its original form. It's very important to support and protect supply management. That has been the Liberal Party and government's commitment. We created supply management, and we will keep defending it. And I hope that the Conservative Party will also encourage Conservative senators to vote in favor of the bill in its original form.
So, if the Senate is proposing amendments, doesn't that just come back to the House anyway?
It does, yeah, it does. So the House can reject it, but the way it works is that the Senate and the House are supposed to work together until they're able to reach a mutual agreement. If they're not, then typically it defers to the House. So what the House envisioned for the bill is what is the final format of the bill. That the Senate amendments, in a case where they're not able to agree, are usually tossed to the side.
Now, the only way I can think that they're kind of upset about this is because of just time. So, if the amendment is proposed in the Senate and then it's voted down, then it actually doesn't have to come back to the House to have that discussion, and then they can potentially just move it along and then eventually reach royal assent. Otherwise, there's a significant delay that actually happens, because once the amendments are accepted by the Senate and then kind of sent back for negotiation with the House, the Senate's going to talk about other bills at that point, and then this 282 would then get just moved to the back of the line and then in the logjam that's in the Senate, and it takes them forever to actually get through this stuff. So that's probably providing some clarity for everybody.
Well, and if this is a bill that the government wants, which it's a private member's bill, we know that by the number 282, but if this is a bill that the government is in favor of and they want to push it through, say, before an election or before prorogation, the fact that it's being held up in the Senate by one of their own senators,
is not a good thing.
No, it's not at all.
The honourable member for La Rosemont, La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government's record on the environment is pathetic. We're in a climate crisis,
NDP,
and the Liberals aren't getting the job done. The minister announced regulations to cap emissions from the oil and gas sector that'll take effect in 2030 in order to reach our 2030 targets. Today, the Commissioner of the Environment just confirmed that the Liberal plan isn't working. In fact, Canada comes in last in the G7. Will the minister finally do his job, or should he go back to climbing the CN Tower?
Oh, beautiful. Well done.
It's not often you hear a good singer from the NDP, but that was good.
No, it's not. That was good. Amazing.
Look, even you can see Steve McKinnon, even he's smiling at that one.
You guys can't deny that was a good joke.
Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I would encourage my honourable colleague from Rosemont, La Petite Patrie, to truly read the Environment Commissioner's report. It shows that Canada's measures are working. We have the best performance from 2017 to 2021 among G7 countries. It's true the Conservatives hadn't done a very good job before that, so it was an easy act to follow. But this is the first time in Canadian history that greenhouse gas emissions have been going down when the economy is going full tilt.
Sorry, I can't trust anything that Jubo says about any report anywhere. And the reason for that is specifically on the Parliamentary Budget Officer's format of the carbon tax report, where sounds like at the direction of the Liberals, they put in the subtotal of the carbon tax on one line, and that's what the Liberals pick out and cherry pick in their actual talking points, where they say 8 out of 10 Canadians is better off. When if you actually go down to the grand total, taking all factors into account, no, they're not. And that's the most important metric, but they don't want to talk about that. So, like, again, how do you go from worst performer in the G7 to, oh no, we're the best? Like,
oh, because the Liberals came and took over, right? That's I don't know.
Everything's phenomenal since the Liberals took over. That's why the country's a disaster.
And that's thanks to the system we put in place.
Ladies, Naimo Ladysmith.
Canadians deserve better than that excuse. Mr. Speaker, another climate report, another massive Liberal failure. Canadians are terrified of the impacts of the climate crisis. They need action. But today's report has given the Liberals a failing grade. We have the worst climate record in the G7, while this government caves to the biggest and richest polluters. And the Conservatives, well, they will always put the interests of the rich before the planet. Absolutely. When are the Liberals going to stop putting oil and gas CEOs ahead of Canadians?
Why don't you guys vote
The
against
Honourable
them?
Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
One of the key measures, Mr. Speaker, of our climate change plan is putting a price on pollution. And on May 8th,
the only plan
member
you
from
have.
Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie said, and I quote, "This is why New Democrats, as progressive and environmentalists, are in favor of putting a price on pollution." Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess that under the pressure from the Conservative Party of Canada, the NDP are no longer progressives and they're no longer environmentalists. On this side of the House, we will continue to fight for climate change. We will continue to fight for Canadians.
We don't care if they all have to live on the street. We're going to continue to fight for our tax plan.
Well, and that's just it. It's not a climate plan, it's a tax plan.
The Honourable...
Oh, this looks like Keurig.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Yep.
Last week, the government's own data revealed that oil and gas is the only sector of the economy showing signs of life. And on Monday, the NDP Liberals announced a job-killing cap on oil and gas production. The government's own analysis admits that their cap on production will cost thousands of jobs and billions of dollars, destroying Canadian paychecks. No wonder Canadian-based Enbridge is building a $700 million pipeline in the United States. Wow. This Prime Minister is creating powerful paychecks for American energy workers and American steel workers, while Canadian workers can't afford their food or rent. Why is this Prime Minister driving investment jobs away from Canada towards the United States?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, what the member is saying is simply false. It's a cap on pollution. Pollution is a bad thing, something the Conservative Party of Canada should understand. You want to talk about investment? Let's talk about a $2 billion investment that Strathcona, an oil company in Alberta, is making in Canada to make sure that workers in Alberta and the energy sector can have a future in a carbon-constrained world, something the Conservative Party of Canada is incapable of understanding, Mr. Speaker.
What? So, Keurig points out that it's a 35% production cap, that your own department revealed that this is going to cost thousands of jobs, and your retort to that is, but that's just not true.
So give us some stats. Give us the facts. Let's hear them.
Well, and that's the problem, right?
He doesn't have them.
Colleagues, especially when the Speaker stands up and the House is quieting. That's not the time to interfere. I'll ask the Honourable Member as well from Edmonton Manning, please, to allow the responses to be given until the Honourable Member is recognised. The Honourable Member from Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, that minister may not understand how the energy industry works, but Canadians do. Regardless of the name, this cap is going to drive investment out of Canada, costing Canadians their jobs. It's been 9 long years of a Liberal government bent on destroying the Canadian energy sector, despite the industry being the biggest driver of the Canadian economy and employing hundreds of thousands of Canadian workers. So I'll ask the question again. Why is that extremist minister and that Prime Minister helping Donald Trump create American jobs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
So I have to say, politically, this is very smart for the Conservatives to start kind of invoking Donald Trump.
Yeah, because that's what the Liberals are going to be doing when they're going door knocking. Oh, do you want Pierre Poilievre and Donald Trump in power? So by getting ahead of it, the Conservatives are going to get a leg up.
Right. So they can say, well, who said we were supporting Donald Trump? We're actually criticizing this prime minister for helping Donald Trump. So it's very smart for them to try and get ahead of this as much as possible because they know what's coming from the Liberal playbook.
Direct investment, Mr. Speaker, is up in Canada. Investors are coming to Canada because we provide stability. We provide opportunity. Mr. Speaker, Canada has a long-standing history of standing up and protecting Canadian workers. And when it comes to the last NAFTA negotiations, it was the Conservative Party of Canada that asked us to back down. Well, we didn't, Mr. Speaker. We stood up for steel workers. We stood up for our auto workers. We stood up for our agricultural workers and our farmers, Mr. Speaker. And we'll do it again.
What about South November?
One of our primary exports.
Right.
But it's such a joke when they say, foreign investment is up. It doesn't count when you have to provide them almost $20 billion of incentive.
Incentives or bribes?
Take your pick. Take your pick.
The Honourable Member from Cypress Hills, the Honourable Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost as they continue to crush the Canadian energy sector. This week, they announced their job-killing oil and gas production cap. Enbridge, a company based in Calgary, is taking their $700 million investment out of Canada to build a pipeline in America. That's jobs and powerful paychecks for American pipeliners, for American engineers, and for American truckers. Why is the Prime Minister so focused on creating powerful paychecks for Americans and not for Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Salt experts that disagree with them, but recently their go-to guy, Sylvain Charlebois, said climate change is the agri-food sector's greatest challenge and agreed that climate change is a major driver of food price inflation. So if Conservatives actually cared about elevated food prices, they'd have a plan to address climate change, but they don't. They've got nothing. No plan to address the biggest challenge in the agri-food sector, no plan to address the biggest driver of food price inflation. Now, are they going to start attacking this expert too?
Yeah. They've got nuclear.
The Honourable Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
So again, we will say it for the 10,000th time. People agree with climate change, they disagree with climate change. Let's just take it for the sake of argument that climate change is 100% real. It is 100% caused by humans and carbon footprint. Let's just say it is, okay? Because the best way to refute somebody's argument is to take their argument and reduce it to absurdity. So, if that's the case, what exactly is Canada going to do to affect climate change when we only have a 1.6% carbon footprint, and meanwhile China increases their annual carbon footprint by that amount every single year? What is that going to do? You can literally starve everybody, you can shut down all our machinery, you can effectively turn Canada black in terms of energy, and it's going to have precisely zero difference whatsoever. You have to go by the Pareto principle, and that's what the Conservatives are looking at doing. They're looking at saying, okay, you know what? We're not going to magically save the world by putting a carbon tax on all Canadians and driving them into the ground. What we can do is we can invest in our liquefaction and natural gas sector, invest in nuclear, and export that technology to countries that are actually really bad polluters. Then Canada has a net positive, and a massively net positive, mind you, impact on the environment worldwide. And then you create Canadian jobs, and you're exporting Canadian product, and you're making Canada rich in the process.
You know, like the Conservatives are suggesting.
Right. That's what their plan is. Sounds like a pretty comprehensive plan to me.
Mr. Speaker, it's time for the Liberals to get back to the real world where Canadians are struggling to eat, heat, and house themselves. While the minister tries to claim that the production cap is going to create thousands of jobs, his own department is saying that's going to cost the Canadian economy billions of dollars and that we're going to lose thousands of jobs. The Canadian oil and gas industry already provides powerful paychecks for our people. So why is the Prime Minister so hell-bent on destroying those powerful paychecks and giving them to Americans?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
We love powerful paychecks, Mr. Speaker. Actually,
lies, lies and slander.
No. I actually take that a different way. I'm sure you do love your quote-unquote powerful paycheck that you get from being a member of cabinet. Pretty sure you love that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, anyway.
wages have outpaced inflation in Canada for the last 20 months, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite wants to talk about the United States. Well, I've got some information for him. Last week, the economist David Rosenberg said U.S.-based investors should strongly consider moving from New York to Toronto, Mr. Speaker. Now, I am not a Leafs fan, Mr. Speaker, but I happen to agree with that economist, and I know that investors right around the world are looking to Canada.
Only if they call up Justin Trudeau and say, hey, you remember that Volkswagen deal where you gave them $15 billion? Yeah, can we have that deal too? And we'll invest in Canada.
Right. I mean, you can't really live in Toronto anymore because it's so expensive. I mean, the average rent for a one bedroom is like over $2,800 if I'm not mistaken. Like, it's insane. When I was in college, and I went to college just north of Toronto, but rents were like $800 and that was expensive.
Yeah.
The honourable member from Edmonton, Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost. The government's own analysis admits that their cap on production will cost Canadians thousands of jobs and billions of dollars. Meanwhile, we have a Canadian company who can't get a pipeline approved in Canada, investing $700 million in a U.S. project. And get this, in 2023, they increased oil and gas imports to Canada with over 40 million barrels shipped across the Atlantic from Nigeria and Saudi Arabia alone. Why is this Prime Minister so intent on funding powerful paychecks in the U.S. and everywhere else while Canadians struggle to afford food and housing?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Innovation.
Speaker, I know Conservatives like to cherry pick per capita measures that try and...
What?
Oh yeah, it's the Conservatives, you guys. Oh, gosh. You know, I do want to say Mike Lake is a really cool guy. We've had the opportunity to speak with him privately, actually, about autism and our son, and he's a really cool guy. So I don't think he'd be spitting out BS stats.
No, but I just the gaslighting and hypocrisy is just next level. And the sad thing is, we all need to kind of mentally prepare ourselves. It's actually going to get much worse going forward and as we head into an election. So try and mentally prepare yourselves for as much as possible. For the garbage that the Liberals are going to be spewing?
It is even worse?
It's not going to be a dumpster fire. It's going to be a landfill fire, folks.